Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. What I would like to do is actually review a conversation that I had with David McQueen on Standing for Truth about 2 weeks ago. They were supposed to be doing a debate about, I don't know, the age of the earth or the flood or something like that. And the opponent had to reschedule, and so they ended up just kind of doing this open mic night. And so I didn't know that this was happening. I just got home from work, sat down, and saw this going on live. And I jumped on here at the end to kind of have a conversation and ask a couple of questions of Mr. McQueen. Um, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of this back and forth. Mr. McQueen is a little long-winded, and he talks a little slowly. So I've sped up the audio just a little bit so that we can get through it quicker. I'm not going to play the whole thing. You're obviously, you're more than welcome to go and watch the full back and forth. But my goal here was really to just see what exactly the arguments are. Again, I'm not super familiar with like the Genesis flood model argument, like art, like creation science style arguments. I've read the book of Genesis. There's not any science in it. So I wasn't really sure how a professionally trained geologist was going to be applying, Genesis flood models to actual geology. So I was a little curious. So anyways, I hopped on, asked a couple of questions. So what I want to do is kind of review his points, his response, elaborate a little bit more on where I was coming from and my thoughts, and then in the end, I want to talk a little bit about the nature of science and what we can and can't learn about the past. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and play it. I'll stop it periodically, and I'll probably going to jump around a bit, but yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So this is me first, just trying to get him to tell me where he stands and his positions.
Quick questions, just so that I can one kind of clarify your position. I don't want to, like say something that's not true. So can you clarify for me your interpretation of how sediments were deposited during the flood? We've got a bunch of sediments layered on top of each other. What is your interpretation of how those sediments were laid down?
Okay. I just happen to have a model here that I can use. Actually, I have two models. Let me get them here. Um, Here is model number one. Ms. McQueen has discovered a new formula for Play-Doh-like substances, and this is made from coffee, I might add. So imagine the brown group of rocks to be limestones. The washcloth is a white sandstone in between the limestones. You see this in the Grand Canyon. You see this in other places. And so the idea, Zach, is that remember, it's a 12-month cycle in the time of the Great Flood. It's a catastrophic event. So it's catastrophic sedimentation that moves, and I'll take this off and turn it this way. This is a block of sand the size of Massachusetts. Huge amount of sand. It moves across America, gets deposited. And my second example, instead of using Play-Doh, I'll use these towels here. Zach, you see the blue towel at the bottom?
I do.
That illustrates a.
Okay, so he's about to basically say the same thing he just said previously, and neither of these analogies were very clear to me. I didn't fully understand what exactly he was trying to get across. It came across easier for me a little bit later, so I want to just jump ahead back to where I'm asking the question because I was a little confused about his model here. But I'm going to jump ahead and then we'll address what his model actually was.
Are fairly young rocks and formations being operated on catastrophically not long ago.
Okay, so yeah, can I let me just kind of jump in and see if I can clarify sort of my thoughts here. So
yes,
there are some sediments that are 23 meters high, right? I mean, you've got really really tall sediments, and across those different layers, you might have the remnants of, let's say, an ancient lake, and across each one of these different layers, you have what are effectively shore organisms, right? So at the very bottom layer, you might find organisms that live in shallow water. And then in layers above it and layers above that, you find a continuous distribution of shore-like organisms. In fact, we even have things like ghost shrimp, which are burrowing crustaceans that live in coastal regions. And you can find them in layers that are 20 meters deep, 10 meters above that, and then at the surface. And so the question is, if all of these sediments were laid down catastrophically and rapidly, how is it that these burrows from these burrowing organisms remain in these rock layers that are 30, 40 meters deep?
Okay. You and I'll have to debate another day. Give your name to Donnie, because you've raised points that we could talk for 2 hours about. But let me give you the short version. For those of you that don't know Zach and don't understand what he's asking, he's talking about paleo environments or niches that he is claiming that you can go to a certain area in the Appalachian Mountains or a certain area north of the Grand Canyon, and you can find fairly thick units, let's say 10 feet thick, and there will be geologically what are called scolithos tubes, which are worm tubes that cut through these layers and are like this. His argument, now you're not going to find worms, they're 20 feet long, but I hope you see my point here. If this is a cross section, how can you explain these being across that layer? Well, my first answer is, Zach, let's you and I go to the field with our rock hammers and walk an outcrop and see if you can really find something like this.
So what I'm going to show now is actually, this is the paper that I had in mind when we were talking about this. I had just read this paper a couple of weeks prior because I'm just interested in these random sorts of factoids. We used to collect ghost shrimp in my graduate school, and so I'm kind of partial to them. But there was this neat paper that I came across where they were looking at trace fossil associations in an ancient lake, Lake Pannon, and this is in Slovakia. It's no longer a lake. It's hasn't been a lake for more than 10 million years, so no humans were around when this was a lake. And what I want to show you is sort of a simplistic diagram from this paper. So this is the paper, but what I'm fixing to show you is a simplified version of the facies that they find here in Lake Pannon. And so effectively, this is the sort of thing you're seeing. So what he's drawing is the surface sediment at the top. That's the modern sediment, right? That's just dirt, soil, etc. But then below that, you begin to have the actual facies that are reflecting from Lake Pannon. At a relatively higher layer, you have evidence of marine bioturbation. You find things like shells. I've drawn these little black lines. These are to represent burrows. And then you find a large chunk that's an anoxic sediment, followed by an additional layer that is marine bioturbation, and then followed by some more layers that are just silt, clay, and that include some microfossils. Again, this is a highly simplified version. If you want to see their full figure, which is actually like a whole page long, I couldn't actually fit it on this slide. Go to that paper, check it out. They did some super cool stuff. There's a whole series of papers on this particular formation. It's called the Ghibli Formation in Slovakia. It's not unique. There's a lot of formations like it, but this was the one that happened to come to mind when we were chatting about this. And what he's claiming here is that he doesn't think that if you go out into the field, you actually see this. That you only see this here at the surface, that you wouldn't see these marine bioturbated layers further on. And we're going to see here in just a second how he tries to explain this pattern when I press him a little bit on it.
My argument is, yes, you can find worm burrows, scolithos, that are within a few inches of each one of these layers. But if these are being picked up in a packet, the way that I described using this coffee Play-Doh, if these are being picked up as a packet and moved catastrophically, you can see where some of the features inside this packet, including raindrop impressions and cross-bedding and so forth, would be preserved as it's moved. And so that's my answer, Zach.
So I just want to be sure I understand. So you think that these rock layers during the flood were lifted, moved, and placed in different places? Is that the argument?
Yeah, and the best example of that is actually coal.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to stop him here. But okay, so to diagram this out, this is what he's suggesting: that there were two layers in different parts of the world. Doesn't matter where they are. And he used the example before about layers is the size of Massachusetts, right? So very, very large rock layers that could be, in his example, 10 feet thick. And the example from the Ghibli Formation is actually more like 10 to 20 meters thick, that were lifted, moved, and placed into a different spot on the globe. So under his model, what you would have to assume, this is, again, this was the surface one, and this is the one below. For this arrangement to have occurred, he's suggesting that during the Great Flood, this layer was lifted, moved, and placed perfectly on top of that layer. That's what he's claiming happened. And that's the only, and that to me is just a bizarre claim, because it would assume that, for one, this chunk happened to have the exact organisms in it, the exact micro and macro fossils, the exact species of ghost shrimp, continuously all the way through, that it happened to be picked up from a coastal area, happened to be moved and placed perfectly in another coastal area that just happened to have that same assemblage of organisms, such that it would look like it was one single continuous layer. That is, I can't fathom that. I can't fathom how anybody would find that to be a reasonable argument. I try to push back a little bit. Let's listen to what I say. He goes on a little bit about coal and stuff like that. He gets off on a bit of a tangent. So I might end up stopping and jumping forward a little bit, but I'll let this go on for just a second.
Let's wait just a second. So what I'm talking about are actually sedimentary layers. These are layers that are not rock, like they were sediment, and you can see the sedimentary material in them, right? Like they're not, they were lithified much later, but they formed from clay. So they couldn't have been suspended in water as solid rock. They would have been clay particles in water.
Well, I think you're missing a point here. I've spent part of my career looking at coal measures because my training mission was in economic geology. And if you look.
Yeah, and now he goes off on this whole coal thing. So again, in the Ghibli Formation, in this paper that I'm referring to, these layers are made of clay, they're made of silt, they're made of clay and silt-like mixes of white sands. Like they are sediment. They have been lithified into sediment. But if they had been picked up in an aqueous solution in like a massive water body, I can't help but think that they would have broken down. And so that was the point I was trying to make, is that these sediments appear to have been laid down smoothly, right? Where there's very clear, slow accumulation of sediment that looks as if it was precipitated one layer at a time, not in some gigantic chunk packet like this, right? It looks like each, few centimeters is a layer of sand or a layer of clay or a layer of silt. It just doesn't look like it was lifted and moved in a packet. You would think that would be something you would obviously see, or that it would leave a remnant in the place that it came from with some giant tear in the ground. I don't know. I was completely baffled by this, and I don't know if I made like a good press on him, because I was so confused that this was where he ended up going.
At these coal measures, like my colleague, if you write down the name Steve Austin, who got his PhD at Penn State, looking at coal measures that show movement.
Yeah, so he's going to claim. I'll just let him do it.
Autochthonous coal, and then coal measures that kind of formed in place called autochthonous. What he found is that the Kentucky number 12 coal seam clearly has evidence of being moved. Now, how does that bear on your question? Coal, in the evolutionary view, is supposed to start out as as a peak.
What is it in the evolutionary view? It's the way coal is formed. I don't whatever.
Moss kind of situation. And then, depending on the amount of pressure, it goes to bituminous and anthracite coal. But in Austin's model, you have got actually polystrate trees and
He had to throw in the polystrate trees here.
zones of clay rich, almost like a paleosol. And his argument is that if you know Bastrop, you know that it's in a parish, right? We don't have counties, we have parishes, right?
Right.
So he's arguing, or has evidence from his 1979 doctorate work, that these allochthonous, or a lot of movement on these coals, are the size of the parish in which the city of Bastrop resides. So I don't think you have your facts straight about the nature of a sedimentary unit. Now, I know that you're focusing on an alternating sand, silt, and clay, maybe a limestone thrown in, and so forth. How could you get some of these features within that? We don't have time tonight, but you may have time to come back to Standing for Truth. And if you provide Donnie with your email address or Facebook presence, he can send you some links done by a guy in Australia named John Mackay that bears on this issue of what you can see within sedimentary rocks.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you taking the time to answer the question. It seems, however, that we're kind of committing like an Occam's razor issue here, right? It seems like it would be much more simpler to explain this without having some gigantic continental-sized movement of solid rock maintaining the burrowing organisms within it, and instead just explain it as we see today, which is slowly sediment precipitates from water and forms a layer, right? And that's like what we see happening today. I don't really understand why we need to invoke some kind of like
let me answer that.
Use what we have
Zach,
today to explain the same pattern.
Well, Zach, the reason is that many of us have come to reject the idea from the early 1800s that Scottish and French and British geologists came to, that the present is the key to the past.
Okay. This is where he has drifted off from the path of what science is. I'm going to let him talk a little bit further, and then I'm probably going to jump ahead some because at this point, we've pretty much ceased talking about science. He's going to start making some claims about uniformitarianism, and I want to get a little bit into that in like a philosophy of science perspective. So he's going to give some history here, and then I'm going to be dumbfounded at the end of it. And then I'm going to basically charge him of claiming that all of mainstream science is a conspiracy, and then we have a back and forth. And that's basically our whole conversation. So I'm going to let him talk a little bit more, stick around, and I'm going to we're going to talk a bit about the philosophy of science once he's done.
We reject that and instead say that there are numerous examples of catastrophic sedimentation worldwide. And the blue washcloth that I used to illustrate this Canberra Ordovician unit called in the Grand Canyon, the Peaks in Tennessee, it's called the Rome Shale. And then Professor Dr. Adam Sedgwick in the 1800s named the Cambrian in England after the Cambry tribe, the Celtic tribe. The way I try to explain to intelligent students like you is Adam Sedgwick taught hundreds of geologists during the time.
This is all right. This is where he's like going into the conspiracy theory territory. Just listen to the shift he's about to make. He's going from, we're talking about layers. I'm pushing him a little bit about how this doesn't seem like a parsimonious explanation for what we see. This is not the kinds of things that we see today. And so now he's going into history and talking about, oh, well, so-and-so named this, so-and-so named that. And then he had students and he taught them. And so just follow where he's going here.
And then you finish it. We'll play like Jeopardy. Finish this sentence. The sun never sat
Roman Empire or on the British
or
Empire?
on the British Empire. So these young geologists went all over the world, to India, to America, and they too became professors. And when they would take their students out, they would end up in East Tennessee, where I grew up, and they would see a sandstone with a green mineral called glauconite in it, occasionally containing trilobites that appeared abruptly and fully formed.
And that appeared abruptly and fully formed. He just threw that in there because we have no ancient arthropods that are precursors to trilobites, or we have no stem arthropods whatsoever. Come on, man.
And they said, wait, this is exactly what Professor Sedgwick taught us. And so they would call them Cambrian. And so these British trained, Sedgwick trained guys went all over the earth. And then Sedgwick took them out to Devonshire and showed them rocks with fish fossils in them. And he called that Devonian. And so they carried that vocabulary. Perhaps that's helpful.
Yeah, no. By that point, I'm just sitting here like, what? Like I didn't even. I struggled to kind of follow his line of reasoning. I struggled a little bit to follow where he was going. I don't know if there's anybody still listening to this, if you followed where he was going, but I was a little bit dumbfounded. And what I kind of took from it was that he was insinuating. He didn't blatantly say this in what I've shown, but if you actually watch all of this, not just me and him, but him talking to previous people and him just talking before, he definitely makes some claims that that there's a conspiracy, right? That like mainstream geologists are conspiratorially, conspiring to hide the truth, right? And what he seemed to be suggesting there was that there were these students of this guy that had an idea, and he told his students, and so they just believed him, and they went around and they just taught their students who taught their students, as if there was never any critically challenging, and that we're all just following the idea of one guy, right? So that was kind of what I got from that statement, and so that's why I'm fixing to like make this claim that I think he's just proclaiming this all to be a conspiracy.
Zach, if you had anything you wanted to respond or object to, go ahead.
Not particularly. Like I appreciate again that the history behind this. It's super fascinating. I'm very interested in the history of science. But it seems like you're suggesting that all of modern geology is like a hoax, or that we're somehow duped. That we've been duped by our predecessors into believing something. Geologists all around the world have been duped by this, and that seems that's a pretty bold claim, and that seems like that's going to be difficult to demonstrate. Again, I'm not a biologist or not a geologist. I'm a geneticist, but just putting that out there.
As a professional geologist that's been doing this, my undergraduate degree was 1974. I worked for the United States Geological Survey for several years.
Yeah, he just gives his credentials. He's going to spend the next few times giving his credentials, talking about how he respects advances in physics and modern geology, etc. That's all fine. But in the end, that is exactly what he's claiming, right? He is effectively claiming that this is all just a big conspiracy. I feel like we've listened to him enough. Let's see. Do I say anything further?
Like we don't have to have eyewitnesses to be able to convict someone of a crime.
Oh yeah, here we go. All right, hold on. Let's back up just a little bit.
Petrographic microscope. I don't reject that.
Yes. So again, like I said, he was just talking about advances that he agreed with.
At the University of Michigan, I was taught how to use an X-ray diffractometer to tell the difference between gypsum and anhydrite. So don't hear me saying that I've rejected every verifiable, reproducible act of geology. What I'm arguing is that none of my professors, nobody that I know, Donnie included, were there to witness the formation of rocks. In other words, there was nobody there, in my viewpoint, 1,000 years ago, or 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And in your viewpoint, as an old Earth believer, certainly there was nobody there 1 million years ago. Well, that's not good, but maybe 500 million years ago. Can you see what I'm driving at?
But I don't think that we have to have eyewitnesses to be able to reconstruct the past, right? Like we don't have to have eyewitnesses to be able to convict someone of a crime. We reconstruct it based on the evidence. And so if the evidence is, look, I'm seeing sedimentary layers that are formed from clay and sand and other things. I find burrowing organisms all throughout them, 20 plus meters thick. The way that I see sediment, deposited today is very, very slowly on, creek and riverbeds and nearby lakes and streams and things like that. Why would I think that that's not the way that it happened in the past? I would have to be invoking something, again, that I never saw, that I wasn't there for. I'm using what I can observe today to infer something about the past. By assuming what I see today is not the way it worked in the past, would be to invoke something new. That would be to claim there's something supernatural happening that's very, very different than is today what I can see with my own eyes.
Let me give you the benefit of the doubt. And
he has broken out the Bible by this point. This is enough. We've done enough of this. He's going to talk about. He's just going to go on and talk more about how people have not accepted uniformitarianism anymore, people as in people in his group, and that we should just abandon it, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's basically was the end of the conversation. We didn't have much more to say after that. So what I kind of want to do, I just want to wrap this up and talk a little bit about what is science? How do we know what science is? How do we understand it? And why is it that what people like David McQueen are doing is just not science? It's not science. It never will be. And so to do that, we need to get to a fundamental level. I feel like so much of these creation evolution debates are talking above where the actual issue is. And the issue is how we understand science itself. So first, what is it? What is science? So science, as the noun, is a philosophical system of knowledge rooted in empiricism and naturalism that seeks to understand the physical world. There's a couple of more vocab words in that, right? Empiricism is a system of knowledge based on experience and experimentation. It implicitly assumes that the universe is probabilistic. It is opposed to things like rationalism, which is the perspective that there is some certainty that you can obtain about the universe using just pure logic. Like that's not how science works. We understand things through experimentation, and it never produces certainty. We can only support an idea. And the other one is naturalism. And this is the belief that only natural laws and forces act in the universe. That's it. Empiricism was promoted by Francis Bacon. He's largely considered as one of the first philosophers of science. But science not only is a noun, it's also a verb, right? It's a thing that you do. It's a method of investigation that involves observation, experimentation, and hypothesis testing. Now, that's what science is, but there are some assumptions in science. And this is important. And this is something that I've not seen, personally, I've not seen anyone actually lay these assumptions out and talk about them and make them very clear, because they are assumptions. They are untestable. They are unknowable, right? They are purely assumptions, but we all make them, and we must make them to be able to do science, for one, and we make them just in our everyday lives. Subconsciously, we make these assumptions. So what are they, and why are they important? Thomas Kuhn was one of the first people to kind of point this out, but I believe that there are 4 fundamental assumptions of science, and if you reject any one of them, you cannot do science. As an enterprise, it falls apart. And this is going to have direct bearing on what McQueen and I were just talking about. So, number 1, there is a shared objective reality that we all experience. That is to say that reality is not subjective. What I experience and you experience about the physical world are exactly the same. 2, the objective reality, or the universe, is governed by natural laws. 3, those natural laws can be discovered using the scientific method by humans. If there is something about nature that is just undiscoverable by humans for whatever reason, then it's just outside of the realms of science. We can't even investigate it because its very nature is undiscoverable to us. And then finally, and super importantly, and what bears heavily on creation versus evolution and this discussion about geology with David McQueen, is that the uniformity of law and process. That's those laws of nature are uniform or unchanging across space and time. This is super important. And this is an assumption that is made in all science. This is not just evolution. This is not just geology, but chemistry, physics, engineering, everything has to make this assumption. And think about it just for a moment. If I assume that the laws of nature are changeable, that if I reject this and think that this is not true, then at any given point in time, the laws of physics could just change. They could just completely change, such that tomorrow, if I throw a ball into the air, it may never come down again. And yesterday, somebody could have dropped a ball and it never came down again. But today I drop it and it falls. So if we don't accept that the laws of nature are unchanging and that they are unchanging not just into the past and the present, but also into the future, then we can't do science. We can't do it. We can't make predictions without laws being uniform. Okay? We can't administer medicines because experiments may only work in this particular time and place, but over there they may not work anymore. Right? We can't study stars and planets and anything more distant than our own, like physical existence, because we can't possibly know what living on Mars is like because we've never been there. And the heck, for all we know, the physical laws are different on Andromeda than they are here. So like all of these things are relevant to whether or not science can function as an enterprise, right? And so when McQueen says things like, we reject uniformitarianism, we reject that the things that we see with our own eyes today can explain things that happened long ago, because we believe that the literal laws of nature changed in the past. That's what he's saying. That's what he's claiming, is that in the past, there was some catastrophic event that was supernatural. God did it. It's a fancy way of saying God did it. God came down and changed the physical laws and changed nature, right? So if that's the case, then you're no longer doing science. If you can't accept that the laws of nature are uniform across space and time, you're not doing science. You're just not doing it, because this must be true for science to work. Now, like I said, it's an assumption of science. All four of these things are assumptions of science. Any one of them may be false. Like in some like absolute way, one of them may be false. But we have to make the assumptions to do science. It just must be done. All right. So with that, I'm gonna close out here and stop sharing the screen. I hope that this was interesting and probably not very informative, but hopefully it was interesting. David McQueen was a really nice guy. He, obviously we disagree, and I think that he's very wrong on these points, but I respect that he was willing to have this discussion with me. There was a debate recently on, I think it was Modern Day Debate, with him versus King Crocoduck. You can watch that. Crocoduck is a physicist, so they had a little bit more of a technical discussion. So if you're interested in that, check that out. But yeah, if you enjoyed it, leave me a comment. If there was something that you think I could have said and didn't, let me know. But yeah, thanks for watching and have a great day.